Hello, Peter4789 Sirus here, and welcome to another rendition of Sirus Gaming Corner, a gaming podcast where I, Swordfish1390, and Force reviews talk about various gaming topics, from old games to new games. Everything is fair game as far as discussion goes. So, how are you guys' evening going so far?
It's going very well. Always glad to be back.
Same for me, going good.
So, for today's episode, we're gonna talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Remember when Square Enix said they wanted to do a Final Fantasy VII Remake unless it was really in trouble?
Yep.
I remember when everyone had an outcry after that tech demo for the PS3, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, Final Fantasy VII Remake!"
That didn't happen. And then, of course, that fateful event for unveiling Final Fantasy VII for PS4 with upscale original graphics.
Oh yeah, I remember that E3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They made it sound like they was remaking it then, and all it was just a port.
It was literally just a tech demo. That's it.
Well, the tech demo was for the PS3 game or PS3 unveiling.
Yeah, we're talking about the PC and PS4 port.
Yeah, so the guy comes out on stage and he's all getting everybody excited. He says this game has been a top seller on every console that's been released prior. It was a best-selling game for PlayStation, and everybody's getting excited, saying, "Oh my God, it's a remake! They're remaking the game."
And then he said the famous words,
"Yes,
updated original graphics or something."
Updated original graphics, and I'm just like, that's not what everybody wanted. Only to troll us during that time that they were actually in works of working on it. Mm-hmm. So they trolled us essentially.
See, this is a game I just never thought would exist. Even when they unveiled it, like officially, it just feels like it felt so surreal when it came out, and I actually played it. I was like, "This thing, I am playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It is out. It is a real thing." It was just so like bizarre and just. But
when you play the intro and you see it recreated to one up, a representation of Midgar when it zooms in towards a train and a cloud jumps off of it, it just feels like, I feel like I'm back in 1997 playing this game all over again, because it was one of my favorite games on PlayStation, and to be able to play it with upscale original HD graphics, I was blown away by it. Just to actually have the game in my hand to play it, it's pretty crazy.
I guess before we start, we should probably recap our experience with original Final Fantasy VII. For me personally, like, I beat the original Final Fantasy VII now, but I did it after I played the remake, so yeah. It's
definitely a different experience compared to most people, especially like me and Forrest.
Yeah.
Well, that might be a good thing, actually, because now we get to see what he thought of the game, the new one versus the old one. And in our cases, we'll get to experience our thoughts of the game since we've beaten it already. So that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I probably say I like the original Final Fantasy VII. It has its own charm. Like, I can see that it was pretty revolutionary when it came out. Especially since you didn't really see much. Like, this is the first 3D RPG, I think, at least for the main public, for most people.
Maybe, yeah, you might be right. Well, I mean, it was, obviously it was the first 3D Final Fantasy, like specifically. But yeah, as far as RPGs in general, it's
like in terms of, I know RPGs wasn't mainstream, but I think Final Fantasy VII, the original, was a lot of people's gateway game to JRPGs in general, just like how Full Metal Alchemist and maybe Cowboy Bebop is like the gateway anime.
Yeah, for anime
fans. But yeah,
I was gonna say, what was that anime? The one from the 90s.
Are you talking about Evangelion?
No, Sailor Moon. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
But yeah, I say I like Final Fantasy VII. I like the world that presented. I really like it's not really steampunkish. It's more like, I guess, diesel punk.
Yeah, it's like almost contemporary.
Yeah.
Almost.
I like the world that presented. It was very down to earth, gritty, but also very colorful as well. It never felt out of place. It felt like its own world. The story and characters was interesting. I thought Cloud was a pretty interesting character, especially with his identity crisis, I guess you could say, and what result of it, especially in the second disc where he's not all there, we shall say. And
he was a unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with how we're discussing this game really shouldn't be about a full review.
Yeah.
Per se.
I'm just highlighting my experience from the original Final Fantasy VII.
I get what you're saying. It's just that the problem with talking about the game is I want to keep my judgment as far as even with my first experience with the game strictly to Midgar, because it really would make it hard for me to, like, I guess, judge the game further past Midgar, just because it just wouldn't be right.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, that's just what I mean, I don't mean anything like saying what you can say what you want to say about it, but I was just thinking strictly for myself.
In terms of combat system, I find like the original Final Fantasy VII ATB system okay. It wasn't really all that exciting for me to play
revolutionary.
through. Yeah. But it was still fun enough for me to play through. And,
I think it's like faster paced compared to like the older Final Fantasies. Like I think like in terms of just fast paced, the animations and everything are for the more elaborate spells. Like everything moved at like a pretty good pace in the battles. They didn't feel like they dragged, except for the summons.
But that's what you'd be doing most of the time. So,
it's true.
I never did. I only did that towards the very end of the game.
I don't know. I just use mostly summons since why not?
They are pretty OP.
Yeah.
No, I use my regular magic. I never really relied too much on the summons, but I'll admit there were a lot of summons in that game. You could do summons anytime, anywhere, as long as you had as long as you had them equipped.
I would say that the part of magic is probably OP in the original Final Fantasy VII. Just mostly because you want your AoE skills, AoE spells, and especially summons to finish the battle as quickly as you can. It's like for the first disc, sort of the second disc, I mostly just use summons. But then when I got Ultima, and then I just use that to wipe everybody out until I get the Knights of the Round. But yeah, also Final Fantasies haven't had quite a bit of content. It's like most of the side content is probably ended into the like third disc. But yeah, like overall, Final Fantasy VII is a pretty good RPG, I think. How about you guys?
Yeah, it's very, very solid. Very, just a very good RPG.
Like I probably recognize it in the same tier as like Devil May Cry in terms of being a revolutionary game, but it's probably a game I respect more than a game that I'm gonna replay over and over again.
Yeah. I think like once was enough. Maybe down the line somewhere I might give it another playthrough, but like not anytime soon.
You know what's the one thing that stuck out to me though?
Is it the scene?
No, the translation, man. The
grammar. Oh my god.
The grammar, especially with how they say Shinra in the
Shinra.
The Shinra.
Oh no! Look, the Shinra are coming.
I never understood why they called it the Shinra.
It's like saying, "Oh look, the ISIS is here."
Look, the Shinra trademark is here.
It's like I never thought about it because I hadn't played the game in a long time, but that was one thing I thought was kind of stupid. Like the Shinra. I was like, couldn't you just call you? No, not Shinra. The Shinra. I'm like, okay.
That's my thoughts on the original Final Fantasy VII. So what are your guys' quick thoughts on it before we go to the remake?
Well, I'll keep mine brief as I'm only strictly sticking to Midgar. Being that this is Midgar's section of the game. So I originally got Final Fantasy VII from a friend in high school. He was parting with some of his games he didn't like, and he said I could have them. He didn't have the case or the manual to him. most people back then didn't keep their games and manuals compared to how they do now. And
now we get no manuals.
yeah.
That's
So
sad.
he gave me Resident Evil 2 and FF7, and I took them home, and I just popped in both of them in my console for the first time. And I remember getting to the first battle after the train lands and Cloud jumps off, and the very first fight you get into where they run towards you. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know what you're supposed to do. I looked at the screen and just saw little lines running and filling up, and these little characters hitting this guy. And I was like, what kind of game is this? All you do is stare at the screen and hit circle to attack. That's it. And I turned the game off immediately. I thought the game was stupid. And I basically put the game in the case he gave it to me, and I just threw it to the side. That was literally the first time I actually played FF7. I thought it was the dumbest thing I ever played in my life. Little did I realize, about a year or so later, which was 1990, I want to say it's 1998, I think. Yeah, I decided to try it again. I said, you know what? Let me actually sit here and play it. During the same time, I played RE2 the first time when I got 7. And for the same thing. I was chased by these, whatever these things were. I go to the door. I didn't know I was supposed to hit circle because I didn't have the manual. I didn't have the manual to 7 or to 2, so I didn't know what to do. So literally, I just was like, where do I go? I just run in circles in the street in that game, and Leon died by the zombies because I didn't know you're supposed to go to the kendo shop and open the door. So having no manual, I didn't know what to do in 7. I thought it was just a dumb game, But I literally just tried to figure the game out myself. So I gave it another try and I played it. And it was the best experience I ever could have done going back to that game again. Because prior to that, I only played racing games. I only played platforms. I wasn't really exposed to a lot of JRPGs when I was a kid. Never played Zelda and all that stuff. So 7 was really a breath of fresh air. It was just a totally different experience that I had never experienced before with any game. Just so much story that was tied to these characters. It really opened my eyes to how many other video games out there that has this kind of experience. And RE2 was another game that had a narrative-driven story, but it was more survival horror. So both of those games really were my bridge to new games, And Seven's story about the Shinra and Midgar was just amazing to me. You got this team, the Avalanche.
They never said the Avalanche.
They never even did that.
They never even did that. It's only for Shinra.
The Avalanche.
Like the Shinra was trademarked.
Yeah, I don't know, stupid. But Midgar wasn't really fully fleshed out as much as in the remake. But I would say, even back then, just the cool, I wouldn't say like Peter said, it wasn't quite steampunkish completely, but
I heard people say compared to Diesel Punk, it's like it's technologically advanced, but it's also very dirty too, for lack of a better word.
I've never heard of the term diesel punk, but I mean, I think it's a cross between multiple types of styles of gameplay merged into one. The CG for the time period was amazing. Seeing Aerith walk from the back alley out into the street was just cool back then, even though it was polygon, yeah. But it was a cool CG scene that was just never seen before. But I think FF8 revolutionized the CGs like for games, because Final Fantasy VIII CGs were just amazing looking compared to 7. But for the time period, 7 was really, really cool.
I just remember the Final Fantasy VIII image. It's like, you're handsome.
Yeah, there's just a bunch of pixels. You're the best looking guy here.
Yeah, that face definitely shows. Nice and crooked.
The best meme. That's the best thing that came out of Final Fantasy VIII. I'm gonna be honest with you. Is that meme?
Looking at that face of Squall with his mouth being crooked and his eyes being crooked, I was like,
thank you, Final Fantasy VIII, for delivering us that beautiful meme.
Yeah, Thank
Something
God.
good came out of FF8.
Thank God the remaster of FF8 has fixed his face.
No,
Oh
boo.
But
Lame.
aside from that, though, Midgar was more or less. You didn't really get the full experience. You got to walk around a couple of areas, Sector 7 and a couple of areas, talking to people and getting the feel of the world. You get to explore and just pick up items. You didn't really get full on exploration in 7, but you had a couple places you could pick up items. But I think they captured the world of Midgar very well, and the places you could explore, like Aerith's house. But they expanded on the city that was near Aerith's house. You know, everything about 7, I thought they captured well. But Avalanche especially was captured well. Like them expanding on Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse's story, getting to see where Jesse's parents live, in that part of the Shinra area. So I really think 7, in terms of Midgar, was extremely well executed. Even for a game that came out back in 97, I think they did a damn good job with it. I was very pleased. But ultimately for me, just Midgar alone in 7 was just a cool place. Going up to the Shinra building, fighting the Turks and all that stuff. The game was just fun. After really sitting down and playing it again in '98, I loved it. I fell in love with the game. I remember every day I got off of school, I said, I gotta play this game. Gotta play this game. Used to be Pokemon used to come on. I said, man, I ain't watching Pokemon today. I'm playing this. I was like, I'm hooked. And that's actually what made me get away from Pokemon. I got into Digimon much later on, but that transition for me was like, no, this is so much better.
You know what game did that to me on the PS1? Final Fantasy Tactics.
I still have to play that. Still have not touched it.
I've only, Sword, I gotta be honest with you. I can do the tutorial, the first area where you're outside of the cathedral, because it's like a tutorial, sort of. It's not really that hard. It kind of, you have a certain amount of characters you can fight, and that's it. You move on.
I mean, you got like
when
two...
you get to the second area, like the first time, it's not a tutorial. You literally are on your own. The game says "fuck you."
Like the first tutorial stage in Tactics is pretty easy, just because you got like a Holy and Dark Knight in terms of Agrias and I forgot the mercenaries leader's name.
Well, but the thing
I remember it, but I can't remember how to pronounce it. But yeah, him.
The thing I'm trying to say about Tactics is, it's a good game, but holy shit, it's hard as fuck. Because I played it back in the day when I was getting more accustomed to the JRPGs. Because really, Final Fantasy is where I stuck to. When my dad bought me 8 and 9 for $20 each, because 8 was the greatest hit game. Which I fucking hate that game. I played it and I thought it was terrible. And then I played 9 and loved it. I think the PlayStation was a turning point for everybody. But I think specifically 7 was that kind of impact on a lot of people who are JRPG games, because it was a game that revolutionized the genre. Because prior to that, it was 2D sprites. Stories were, they had story. But 7 was the game that said, hey, here's good narrative, here's a start, here's an end. It was a game that kind of had that. You had an achievement you were going for.
I probably say the original Final Fantasy VII had this sense of scale to it that a lot of other RPGs didn't.
It really did.
Just with
and Midgar was one of those examples.
Yeah, just because of how long sprung the story is, just with how the visuals was, and how it was in this isometric view, which really also emphasized the scale of the world, because you're just a small blip within this field map, and then you can see just how large everything is. I think that really helped emphasize the scale of Final Fantasy VII. You just felt like you were going to go into this big epic when you're playing through it. At least that's what I felt.
Yeah, the game, I'm sure, when it came out and people played it for the first time and they entered the world map the first time, everyone's like, wow, this game is massive.
Yep. And the crazy thing about it is, even though I like 9 a lot, 7 just has this certain charm to it that while 9 was really good, you know how you get that first feeling of excitement for a game? I guess in a way, like the game has such an impact on you. And I felt 7 was a game for me that had an impact on showing me there's other games out there that are far vastly better games, better quality games than what was already being offered at the time. You know, same with Resident Evil was the same thing. Resident Evil had the same impact as well, but I just never got that. I never got that sense of feeling that I did to when FF7 Remake came out, because that game was the game that pushed me to the genre. And so 7 Remake playing Midgar I had that impact again. It was like back in the 90s when I was playing it for the first time. But what they did to the remake versus 7 was just mind-boggling. It was already good enough as it was to a point. It improved on things, obviously, but yes, the remake, man. Can't wait till you start talking about that, but yeah.
It's interesting how with how you talk about the PS1 being like the gateway console to many people experiencing JRPGs for the first time.
I kind of feel that way, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the not quite the same for me and Sword, just because we probably got into JRPGs during the PS2 era.
Well, it also depends on our ages.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit older, so for me, during that time period, I was old enough to play those games, because you gotta remember too. For me, that would have been the time period I would have gotten into PlayStation. Would have been in the 90s, because I was 11, 12 years old when the PlayStation came out.
Okay.
So for me, I was a teenager technically, because I was playing a lot of E-rated games. Because my dad wouldn't let me buy anything that was T-rated, because I wasn't. He was too violent. But after my friend gave me 7 and RE2, he was like, "Okay, you get into that age, I'll let you go ahead and play them," which is right around the time. It's 97, 98. 98 really was when about the time my dad was kind of opened up to a little bit to me playing slightly more violent games, but he had a stern feeling towards it. He wouldn't let me dabble too much into it. So as my friend was the exposure. If it wasn't for him giving me 7 and RE2, I probably would have never played. I probably would have not gotten into JRPGs so much later, if at all.
Mm-hmm.
It really was him really giving me that game was where it allowed me to try it. Try to play JRPGs. So yeah, my friend was he was the one that got me into it. And man, was it worth every minute of it, because I played that game day in and day out. It took me about a month or and a half, 2 months to beat that game because of going to school and stuff, but I loved every minute of it. Absolutely. Indeed, if there's any game in my collection that I have that had a huge impact on me, the one I remember the most, that I had most fun with during that time period, would have been FF7.
Okay.
Or Super Mario Brothers as a kid, because me and my dad played it. FF7 as a good experience to something new. And the only other game that had a substantial impact would be Persona 3, as I felt JRPGs were getting kind of stale. And it just seemed like there was nothing really that captured my interest. And Persona 3 was that game that did. So you always have a game that gives you a certain point in time where you feel things get kind of stale. Then you get a game that's really good. It invigorates your interest in games again. And I feel like the 7 Remake does that for me. As Persona 3 did back in the day when it came out. And FF7 did at that time period. So there's a certain point in time I feel like the impact for gaming for me is, but nothing comes close to FF7 in terms of that.
Okay. How about you, Sword?
Well, see, when Final Fantasy 7 came out, I was 3 years old, so I literally was 3, maybe 4 at the time. So obviously, I wasn't really playing any games at the time.
When did Final Fantasy 7 came out again?
I think 1997.
Okay. I would
have been 11 years old at the time.
I would have been 6 or 7.
Okay.
When did Detective came out again?
Tactics
That I
came
don't
out
know.
in I got the game case right here. Let me see. It came out. It was released in 2001.
Okay, that's a
Okay.
lot later than I thought. So yeah, I didn't get until Final Fantasy VII until like 2005-ish when my cousin introduced it to me, and he was like a really big fan of the game, and I didn't really I played it a bit, thought it was fine, didn't think it was great, only because at the time when I was playing it the first time, I didn't really appreciate the older games. I didn't really fully understand and appreciate like what they were and what they represented. So Final Fantasy VII at the time didn't really do much for me. It wasn't until when I downloaded Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation Network where I actually sat down and did a full playthrough of it and played it from top to bottom. And I agree with Peter. It's very solid. It's definitely got problems. Obviously, it hasn't like aged gracefully in a lot of areas with the translation. It's but over. And I think a problem with the game is, or one of the bigger problems with the game, in my opinion, is the lack of direction. I just feel like there's just too much like. There's just the game doesn't really tell you where to go all the time, and I find that to be very annoying. So it's almost like a guide game at times. But anyway, so
You
yeah, I
know,
finished it, and
strangely enough, I used to feel that, but I don't anymore. Just because, like, if you don't talk to any NPCs at all, it could feel like that. But if you do, they would like give you hints about where to go.
sure, but it's just it's still like kind
Yeah.
of
Well, it does that
not always fun.
until you go to Go Gaga, where I don't know. I didn't meet any NPCs to tell me to go to like Cosmo Canyon or Nibelheim, and I just wandered into there.
But that's what's good about those games is that you could wander anywhere if you wanted to. Once you left Midgar,
Uh,
you weren't bound. You weren't
it was
bound.
it was still a
Well,
linear
you were
game.
bound.
Yeah, it was
No,
still like
I don't.
straightforward.
I don't mean in a sense of when you're following a story, it's linear. But I mean the game didn't hold your hand and forced you to go to this town. You could literally wander around as long as you was able to survive a fight, an area. You really weren't bound, other than the fact you may have been on a certain continent and you couldn't obviously go across the water. You know what I mean? But yeah, the game's linear in a sense that if you want to progress the story, you have no choice. So it's every game. Every game has that problem. But if you want to talk about linear, Tactics is linear. It's linear because it is a story. You go to a grid, fight. New story, and you go to another area where you fight. There is no moving around and wandering around and exploring tactics.
But
There is no such thing. But
it's
that's what you call linear.
its combat system is much more open though.
See, you're trying to compare a tactical game to a turn-based. That's really not possible. I mean, if you're talking about exploration,
Like
7 is definitely more open.
It's an SRPG. You shouldn't expect exploration in an SRPG.
Yeah, actually, there are some games that do that.
Some, but like they're the exception.
You ever played a game called Phantom Brave?
No.
So Phantom Brave has the area where you can actually explore and go to the island and find items and pick up other people and throw them around on the field and do all these crazy things. Because most games wouldn't, typically when you play a strategy RPG, you just have story, go to the grind area, maybe go back and grind from a previous map. But no, in this game, you have more freedom to do things. But I get what you're saying. I'm just saying in a sense that it was done more. It shadowed it a little bit more in a sense that you weren't forced to have to go to Neverhind immediately, or you weren't forced to have to go to the other areas in the game. If you wanted to go then and then push the story along, yeah, you had no choice. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, linear it exists in all games.
You know what's fun? You know what's funny? You know Tales of Symphonia?
Mm-hmm.
It's technically more non-linear than Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, during the Silveron part, you can actually choose like what you do in what order.
Yeah.
Which is neat.
Yeah, I never got that far in Symphonia because I got bored of the game, but I think I know what you're talking about though.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you still got a linear story because you eventually you have to go back on track anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I guess what I'm saying is the approach of how you make a game not feel so linear is the way you design it. What's cool about 7 is that even though it's a linear game, it's designed in a way it doesn't feel like you're forced to have to go here right now. Like when you play a Trails of Cold Steel game, at a certain point, you're forced to have to follow the story. When you obviously start going to the story portion, Reen will walk to an area and say, "Oh, can't do this right now." Won't let you leave out and go out in the field, right? At a certain point, some games require you to have to go to the story. The game won't let you just venture off and do what you want. 7 does it sometimes, but most times you can walk around Niflheim, interact with people, talk to people, even before you have to be there. You can go to these areas and fight and grind, even before you have to go to those areas. It's just how it's designed all determines if the game feels truly linear or not. I don't think 7 really feels completely 100% linear. I would say it's a good, if I'd say percentage to percentage of linear to exploration, I would say 70-30. 30 being you have some exploration, maybe 40-60. Because more so it's linear, but not to the point where I felt like it was completely linear. Like in 13, I would say that'd be a 80 to like linear would be 80%, 20% of exploration. Only 20% is because of one area in the game you can go explore. So to me, it depends. It depends on what you call, linear versus, exploring.
I would say it's like 90-10. 10% being
okay.
10% being Rad Pals.
I was being nice, but okay, 90-10. There you go. So I think 7 does a better job than 13, being 40-60, 60% linear, 40% exploration. I think that's pretty good, actually. Any game that has a balance of 50-50, I think is good. Because at the end of the day, a game is linear regardless. Just how you shadow it, how you how you spruce it up to make it not looks linear is all that matters.
Oh yeah,
It's
going back to what Sword said.
My bad, we got way off track, didn't we?
Anyway, so yeah, 5/7, pretty good game. I do like the story a lot. I think it's very interesting, very unique. And I don't really can't think of any kind of story that was told like Final Fantasy 7 at around the time. Controversial hot take here. Unlike Peter, I actually, aside from Cloud, Aerith, and maybe Tifa, I actually didn't like the characters much. I thought they were kind of paper thin.
Like, I like Cloud a lot.
Yeah, Cloud's good.
I like Tifa, Aerith. I thought Barret was cool. Sid was cool too, and I like Red 13. Yuffie was whatever to me, and Vincent. I want to say
Vincent
cool
has
too.
a better backstory than he does an actual character.
Yuffie and Vincent, they're optional characters, and you can tell they're optional characters. Okay.
I did read that when they were developing the game, they actually planned on Yuffie and Vincent being incorporated into the main story, but ended up just making them optional because of, I think it was time constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So they just shoehorned them in as optional characters. But yeah, you're right, it does show.
Yeah, it does
but
show.
I think
like in the main
Cloud
story, you got all these big moments with most of the main characters. Like Cloud with the identity crisis, Tifa is linked to Cloud, so they're sort of in the same boat. Aerith with her connection to the planet and what happens to her at the end of disc 1. Red 13 with his father, about him coming to grips with and changing his mind about his father, like how he thought his father was a coward, but he wasn't really.
Turned out to be like a war hero.
Yeah. And then you got Sid with his whole shtick about the space exploration, about how he's a broken man just because his dream was taken by Shinra when they decided to ditch the space program after his failure with what's her name again? I forgot. Sid's assistant name.
Oh, I don't remember. It was
About how?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember her name.
Yeah, about how she supposedly destroyed Sid's dream at first. How there's some resentment to it, but then how she was right in the end because of the flaw of the spaceship coming true when they do a relaunch.
Mhm.
I think all the characters have like these big moments to them that make them stand out to me.
I think the backstories are good of the
Yeah.
characters. I'll say
Mhm.
that.
What I'm hoping for is, and we won't know until we play the other 2 chapters. I call them chapters technically because of parts.
I probably will say that the remake does do a much better job of having character chemistry than the original. Of them having
Yeah,
Well, here's the
each other.
like for the first time, I actually really playing the remake. I actually really cared about Tifa and Barrett in particular because I didn't think much of them in the original. But like,
in the original, they only stood out as singular characters rather than being in a group setting. I think.
mhm.
Well, here's the thing though. For me, I hope that they expand or at least keep the side stories of those people in particular you were talking about. You know what I mean? I hope they don't take away from what was already a good side story for some of them, or if they expand on them at least.
I think they're gonna still keep it. If
Well,
if,
we don't know that yet.
I mean-
We like I said, I'm just hoping
Mhm.
because you never know. They may just end up changing their backstory to coincide whatever they're going to change. We don't know yet.
Okay.
I'm just hoping that they do not change that because what they did was they added to the story of Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge that wasn't already there before. You know what I mean? So for that, in that sense, that was a good thing they did. It really made those characters flesh out more. I'm just hoping they don't throw someone under the bus and not flesh out their story or take away their fleshed out story for the sake of spending on someone else. Because if Resident Evil 2 and 3 taught us anything, characters that had very little story time end up having none. So I mean, it all depends. So I'm just hoping that they can keep up this good character, bonding moments like they had in this part of the game. It'll be amazing.
Again, back to what you were saying, Sword.
Oh yeah, I also didn't really think much of Sephiroth as a villain. I liked his design. I think he had his origin story was good, but overall I didn't just find him to be terribly menacing or interesting.
I would say that he still have a good presence in the story.
Yeah, like they do a great job of building him up, especially in the Midgar part, like as like a constant threat.
But then, like, I don't think much of him as an actual character.
Yeah. That's more so
like he's not a villain or antagonist I care about in the same way that like I care about Vaughn or Artorias in Berseria.
Yeah.
He's a good enough threat to still be an intimidating villain.
Good foil for like a good thorn in your side for the party to overcome. And yeah, active time battle system, good. Not terribly remarkable because, I mean, up to that point we already played Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 with that very same battle system, so 7 feels kind of like standard in that regard. I do find the shrinking the party size from 4 to 3 to be a little strange, but it not too big a deal. Materia system was really interesting. I don't like how the characters are all blank slates and they're pretty much all determined by their materia.
And
aside
stats.
from, and they're so yeah, and like base stats and also limit breaks. But otherwise, any character is like very versatile depending on your equipment and materia slots.
Even limit breaks, it's hard because most of the characters' limit breaks are basically big damage, so it kind of all blurs to each other. At a certain point.
It's basically just a big fancy attack, really.
It's actually funny that the most unique limit break belongs to Aerith.
Oh, Healing Wind, because that's like the only one that doesn't just attack.
But yeah,
but
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying that
not a whole lot of individuality.
Gameplay wise, they didn't really have much individualized
like
elements to the combat system. Like it all depended on materia. Your characters didn't have unique skills that were specific to them, like it was in the remake.
I think Trails of Cold Steel was a game that really got the combination right, where anyone can use quartz in that game, anyone can use any magic, but they also have their own individual special abilities in the form of crafts. So I think I had a game like that is a really good combination of having good customization and having characters kind of cover every situation while also having their own strengths and weaknesses. But yeah, overall, really like Final Fantasy VII. I was impressed with it. I also heavily respect it. I definitely don't think it's like the greatest game in the world or anything, but it did hype me up enough for the remake, and I bought the remake, and I was personally very happy with it for the most part. And obviously we'll get into detail as we talk about it more. But yeah, that's basically my history with Final Fantasy VII.
Okay.
I played it on the PlayStation Network, and it took me a while to finish it, but I did get around to it, and I finally finished it, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
I guess that concludes our thoughts on the original Final Fantasy VII. Let's jump straight to the remake. So, presentation-wise, it's really, really good.
It's a beautiful looking game and beautiful sounding game.
Game was great
with some questionable textures.
Yeah,
Well,
like the door.
Like the door at the end, and like the slums.
Well, to be fair, they used the Unreal Engine. I mean, it's probably their first time using it, and to be fair, I guess you could say it. That's no excuse either, but
Like when I look at the door at first, I thought it was still loading in.
I mean, the door looks fine to me.
No, it's really bad.
What do you mean? I
For a
got a
game
4K. I got a 4K TV. I know you're talking about the door in the
For a
apartment
game?
or whatever. It looks okay. to me.
Yeah, it's bad.
I mean, PS4 Pro, it's not. It's okay to me.
It's funny though, because with a game that with such high production values, like of all the things to slouch on,
It's the
it's
door.
just weird.
It's the
I mean, are you
door.
really looking at the door
door
that
of all
hard?
things.
What made you guys want to stare at the door for? I mean, I just
Well,
opened
Like
the door.
I
just
know
noticed it.
I stare at the door just because we're forced to interact with it, and I saw how like why isn't the textures loading in?
Okay, well, you guys realize that Unreal Engine is known to have those pop-in problems.
It's not
It's a
even a
common-
pop. It's not a pop-in problem. There's nothing to pop in. That's just the texture.
That's the door. It looks.
It looks like that.
Well, I don't personally have an issue with the game looking the way it does.
I'm not like we're just complaining about this one door, okay? We're not saying
But
that
we're
entire
complaining
game
about
is
a
like
door,
that.
though. I'd be more complaining about the pixelated backgrounds of Midgar when you're going way up in the sky towards where Midgar is, or the Shinra building is.
Yeah, but you're not going to like up close and personal to it like the door
You
was.
technically are. You're gonna pixelated JPEGs. To me, that's more disturbing than a pixelated door.
But overall,
My
I
friend-
was
yeah.
I was really happy with overall presentation of the game.
Yeah, I'm not saying the game visually is perfect.
Yeah.
There are some issues with it. I mean, some of the background textures, like the ground and the walls, look kind of muddy.
I think they really capture Midgard's scale and diesel punkish element that I was talking about before. It does feel like a very lived-in world, as well as like it feels very real, even though it's like technology is pretty abstract. How we think how technology is going right now, but it's still pretty interesting.
But like as far as everything else goes, like the actual raw graphical prowess of it, and like the special effects during battle look incredible, and the cutscene direction is fantastic.
Yeah, the cinematography is just great in this game as well.
Yeah, barring any like very teeny tiny visual hiccups, I think it's a beautiful looking game. Then again, I mean, like that's par for the course for Square Enix. They're known for like having some of the best visuals around in gaming. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake definitely meets their standards. It's fantastic.
It's top tier Square Enix JRPG quality, with an occasional pixelated door or two.
But yeah, there's just like a lot of good things in regards to like judging its presentation.
If you strictly talk about the character models themselves, they're excellent.
Yeah, they're really good too.
No, the voice acting, the lip syncing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best I've ever seen. It's like spot on. That was impressive. Even when the characters are not in cutscene mode, when Biggs and Wedge and them are talking in the background, if you look closely at their faces, the lip sync's perfect. It's just the little touches like that you don't really think about till you actually really think about it. And let's not forget, Peter, pixelated door.
We're just saying that pixelated door is noticeable in a game that looks as good as this.
Well, you gotta have that pixelated door to show that even in the mightiest of Square Enix, they can have pixelated doors.
But yeah, as far as Midgar looks, it looks really great overall. Especially seeing the, like, when you first see the upper plate when you're in the slums, that's just like out of this world, man.
It is. It's really something. It's one of the best looking games by far.
Soundtrack. What do you guys think of the soundtrack then?
I think it's absolutely like amazing. Like,
Me too.
here's the thing: I always really dug the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack for the most part, but I just didn't like it. I think it was held back by the fact that it was all in MIDI format. So I really like the melodies, but the instrumentation always felt lackluster, and it kind of took me out of the soundtrack. Whereas this, I mean, based on the Midgar section and the songs that it uses and remixes, I think it makes the Final Fantasy soundtrack like actually live up to its full potential. So like even my favorite songs in Final Fantasy VII that I really like listening to on their own were like elevated by magnitudes. Like the first area of the game, the bombing mission with that bombastic orchestra, that track just blew me away. And I also love the Genova battle theme remix too in this game. More specifically
yeah,
the
that
third
was
phase
so
of the
good.
boss fight. So I think that this soundtrack in particular, in my opinion, surpasses the original just because it takes all of the great tracks from the first game and just amplifies them.
I'd probably
with like better instruments.
I'd probably say like one of the most impressive things to me is just how massive the soundtrack is in this game.
Yeah, especially
Like,
for such
just
a
like
small
so
part
many,
of the comic.
there's like so many remixes done to the battle theme that never feel like you heard this battle theme too many times in the remake.
Just
because
it's like every area has a different version of the battle theme.
Yeah, so it keeps feeling fresh as you progress the game.
Well, not just that, but even the music they added in for this game, that are new areas. They managed to blend the music in with the older tracks, which was one thing that I was worried about. I said, how will the music sound in relation to the older music? Like in that area where the underground highway that's destroyed, that music reminded me of Final Fantasy 13. And I would at first I was like, does this blend well with the original music? But then I thought about it. I was like, you know what? It kind of goes with it. I can dig it. But yeah, the new music is really good. All the music is redone well. I have no complaints with the soundtrack. I think it's marvelous. Excellent. It's excellent.
Yeah, I don't think we can add anything more to the soundtrack. It just sounds really good. Updated track sounds amazing, and it's just really good. I mean, I bought the soundtrack to it, so yeah. The story.
It's like we already mentioned, and everybody already knows, it is only the Midgar part. It's like the Midgar section in the original game only took about maybe 4 hours to complete. Whereas this just takes that and then adds so much new content.
Yep.
It fleshes out the characters a lot. More specifically, the characters that we meet in the Midgar section.
What do you guys thought when they announced that they were only doing the Midgar section for the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake?
I was a little... I don't remember how I felt in the moment. I guess maybe a little apprehensive, but when I realized that they were expanding it so much and they were going to make the game so much bigger, I thought, okay, this is probably the only way to go. I mean, if the Midgar section, the whole remake itself is about like 30 hours long. It's a relatively long game. They took such a teeny tiny section of the original and expanded it into one massive game. So I was pretty impressed. So when I put into perspective, I can understand and even accept why they went this direction. I'm not mad at it at Square Enix and up in arms like a lot of people were when they announced it.
How about you, Forrest?
I guess I mean, the story is pretty much a 1-to-1 to 7, other than the fact obviously they expanded on Avalanche, Biggs, Wedge, Jesse a lot more. Some new areas were more established by Heidegger. He had more screen time. I definitely think Cloud came out as a better character. More of his expressions are more fitted towards him. He has more expression. He doesn't feel one-sided like he did in the original game.
I think
There's more. There's more of a.
I think they did a good job of foreshadowing how Cloud isn't like the gruff and tough soldier he pretends to be in the remake for the first part. Because you can see more of his, I guess, lack for another word, dorky side to come through. Or
You can also see.
Yeah, I
that
think he's so much more endearing in this remake. In the remake,
at least in
he's
comparison
also
to the
more
Midgar
open
section.
towards the idea of being accepted, not by himself, because he's more of a rogue person. He does little oddball jobs, and he's more. I feel like as he understands and learns and hangs around these people from Avalanche more and more, he starts to get a little more attached to them in a way. And you can always see him smiling every once in a while, and then when he's caught smiling, he doesn't want to admit it. I think it's kind of funny.
I think the most dorky and adorable part of Cloud's character is when he's with Aerith and going through this like
yeah, not the slums, but you're going through
the
like some
tunnels,
sort of
these tunnels.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
The part that got to me, what you gonna say about the part with the high five?
Yeah, I'm talking about that. And then like throughout these parts of the dungeon, Aerith keeps trying to high five Cloud, and then he's like, yeah. And then when it comes to the third time, this part plays out. Cloud is like, is already in a high five state, and then Aerith's like,
He actually goes for the
he's
high
like,
five.
he goes for the high five first, and then Aerith's like, wait, you want to do that? It's like, no. Never mind.
And then when he
He's
finally
literally
does
just
it,
trying to. He's literally like, hey, this is what a badass soldier looks
Yeah.
like. That's literally what he's doing.
Yeah.
it's just funny to me that even in times when trying to stay serious, he just gives in. But I mean, for me, I just felt like I felt like Midgar's story was really good. I mean, all of it was. But I think the biggest impact for me is just having more of the characters fleshed out. I mean, to me, that was really the biggest thing I liked about the game. It's just having more of the story fleshed out. And that's really, I think, what everybody wanted. Because while 7 was good, 7 wasn't perfect. And I'm not saying the remake section is perfect. There are some issues I have with it. But I mean, in terms of the story, however, to me, I don't know how they could have done it any better than what it's already, than what it already is. I think they did a real good job with establishing the characters more than
I think
how 7 did it.
I think the best part about the remake is how well they managed to capture the original characters of the original Final Fantasy VII and execute it in the remake. Because when you playing through the remake, and having that Final Fantasy VII OG experience, and then you see how they done the characters in this game, you do feel like these are the original Final Fantasy VII characters. Which is which is something that should be commended, just because of how Square Enix has handled these characters in other games they've been like a part of.
Yeah, like with the expanded Final Fantasy VII universe or Kingdom Hearts, more notably, like outside of Final Fantasy VII, the original, like every other iteration of Cloud, for example, he's like a mopey loser, like literally just like a mopey loser. He doesn't have that dweeby side that comes out. He's just literally just sad and mopey all the time. And then another character that I think never got done justice outside of the original Final Fantasy VII was Aerith, who was like really sassy and witty and a little flirty. And outside of that, in Kingdom Hearts and anything outside of the original Final Fantasy VII, she's just kind, pure-hearted, like a little flower. They're, perfect little Mary Sue, little character. Just nothing, just very boring.
It's pretty funny, like how Aerith is this over-energetic tease and prankster even, when you get down to it. Why Tifa is the more
like grounded,
caring,
I guess.
Yeah, grounded and caring character.
But yeah, they perfectly captured all of the characters. And honestly, Cloud and Aerith were the ones that I was most worried about, because I'm like, yeah, they're gonna go the Advent Children in Kingdom Hearts, right, aren't they? And they didn't. They captured the original personalities perfectly.
I mean, I kind of didn't think them going that route, because it wouldn't have made sense. Because plus, that would have been stupid if they did. But it didn't make sense for them to do that.
We were just worried because of how they handle these characters in any other games besides the original Final Fantasy VII.
I would normally be worried when it comes to most things, But I think in my mind, I was like, they're not gonna fuck up the characters in this. They can't, because there's too much riding on on them to do that. So I think they learned that, yeah, let's not do that. That would have been a bad thing for them to mess that one up.
And I just feel like not only did they recapture the personalities just great, I honestly found them, like with the expanded story content, I found them to be better than their original counterparts.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned earlier, they feel like a close knit group in this game compared to the original.
I think the expanded part is really good for the expanded story bits. Give more depth to these characters. In the original, Barrett, to me, he just was a loudmouth a lot of the time.
Yeah, like he's just really loud and kind of obnoxious sometimes, and his whole shtick is that he curses.
Yeah, but in the remake, you do feel more depth to the character. You do feel like there's this leader quality to him in the remake, and he believes more in his cause more. I think with how he's like almost like a preacher, or sort of in the remake.
Yeah, he's a lot more dedicated to his cause. Like with being eco-terrorists, and he's justifying their own actions as if they're in the right.
It's interesting how they handle Tifa, because some people think she might be a weaker character just because she's not as gung-ho about terrorism like Vera is in this game. Why in the original Final Fantasy VII she was like, I'm bored with it. Yeah, pretty much it.
But I think that her being more apprehensive in the remake,
I think that does give him more depth. I think it's like Tifa, she is this kind character, so it does make sense why she'd be apprehensive about these bombings, because the bombings doesn't just target Shinra, it targets everyday people too.
So she's thinking like long term, whereas Barrett's like, stop Shinra, destroy the reactors, bing bang boom, done. Whereas Tifa's like, but what about everyone else? So like I said, it just adds more humanization to her. So I thought that was well done.
Yeah. But yeah, I think they added quite a bit of more characterization in the remake. At least for the Midgar section.
And the new content, for the most part, I think is done really well. More so with the expanded content, not so much like the original content, like with the whispers and everything, which is definitely controversial, which we'll talk more into detail. But like the new content, as in like the new stuff with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, for example. I think they're the best examples of adding characterization, because in the original they were barely characters.
They're nothing characters that was designed to just die.
And to be like, hey, feel something. It's like, I don't care.
I'd probably say, if anything, I probably care more about Midgard in the remake than I did playing through the original 7. Because even though I did beat the original 7, after I beat the remake, I still played the original 7 before the remake. And when I got to the part where the Sector 7 plate falls down, I didn't really care about the slums, really, because you barely spend any time in the slums in the original Final Fantasy 7.
Like, a good example in the remake of how they did it well is after you bomb the reactor, you're actually in the slums and you can see the aftermath of the bombing.
Well, not in the slums. You're in like...
you're in a city. I forgot what it was exactly.
You're in the upper plate, but you see just how the bombing has affected the ordinary everyday citizens and how like devastating the bombing was. And you see how these people are now like homeless now, and they don't even know if their loved ones are okay or not. And then you really do feel the gravity of the situation of the bombing. Like, even though like Shinra was the one that did the actual bombing, Bear and the others still had the intention, and they knew that these bombings would affect everyday people, and for the negative. So it's just to see just how these people react to these bombings. Like,
yeah, it does so much a better job at showing the ramifications.
It grounded the game a lot to me, I think. It made it feel much more personalized and real.
And also, like, going back to the slums too, like yeah, you're right. You spend probably like 3 times more like amount of time in the slums in the remake than you did in the original.
Yeah, you spend like 2-3 minutes in the slums in the original.
You go there, you go to the bar, and then you talk a little bit, and then you're out, and then that you don't go back until the plate.
Like in the remake, when you go back to the slums after the bombing, You actually spend a lot of time in the slums just doing side quests, just because that's the part of the game where you can actually do side quests. Because
and you're like interacting with all the various
Yeah.
NPCs and getting a feel for the denizens and everything.
Yeah. In terms of structure, this game is pretty different from the original Final Fantasy VII, because there are parts that are just like story segments, and then there are parts where you're in this town doing side quests and stuff. And it keeps rotating between those sections until the end. And I think it's a good structure because it lets you spend more time in these sections of Midgar to let you know these everyday people that live in the Midgar and let you see how they're dealing with the situation on hand, or just see how their everyday struggle. These side quests made me care more about the people of Midgar than Final Fantasy VII Original did, because like the Final Fantasy VII Original was pretty good as a interlude. It was paced really well, but then I never really cared about the people of Midgar in that game. Like,
yeah, you just don't get a feel for
Yeah.
the characters.
That's just how I felt when I was playing through the original Final Fantasy VII. But in this game,
I feel like just the world building is a lot better.
Yeah, the world building is a lot better in this game, I feel. Anything we want to add, Forrest? Forrest?
No, not really. I mean, you guys covered pretty much everything I was gonna say. I mean, but the only issue I have is really involved in the gameplay, so not so much in the story.
I think the biggest thing to talk about with the story is, what do we think about like the controversial stuff, the whispers, and the possible divergence in sequels?
Wait, well, before that, Wall Market. Let's just talk about Wall Market. Okay?
Oh yeah,
Wall Market, or I like to say, Final Fantasy VII meets Yakuza.
It's like the little Asia portion.
I wasn't sure how they're gonna handle Wall Market, but I think they did a really good job of transferring the PS1 version of Wall Market and give it its own spin in this version. Because like, it just feels like you walk into a Yakuza game, man, when you go to Wall
really
Market.
Does.
What do you think of the dancing section in the Wall Market section?
I thought it was weird. I mean, it was a neat mini game, I guess, but it just really came out of nowhere. Like, how does Cloud know all this choreography and is able to do it perfectly in sync with all the rest of the performers? It was entertaining though, and I really think that whole thing where he like cross dresses, or rather, the act of actually getting the dress was way different in the remake than it was in the original. Because the original was literally just okay, wander around town and get like the different.
I actually think
clothes.
it's more. I actually think it's more interesting, just because.
Yeah. Oh no. I think so. It's a lot more.
Like, you go through the Colosseum, fight through a bunch of unique enemies. And then you go to.
And you fight Hell House of all things.
Yeah, Hell House. Like a normal enemy in the original Final Fantasy VII is given so much spotlight in the remake as the actual boss.
It's like they embrace just how ridiculous that monster design is, but instead of just making it a random encounter, they make it like this really long, challenging boss fight.
And then you go to the dancing section. I think that's pretty much it, right? In order to get the dress.
I think so.
Like, Wall Market just has so much personality to it. I think that made it stand out to me.
But I think like that goes for the case with basically all the towns and the dungeons in the remake. It's just everything's expanded and given and just brought more to life.
You want anything you want to add to Wall Market for us?
I mean, I think it was good. I think in a sense they actually made it better. But Cloud's dancing, like, how did he have time to practice that?
That's literally exactly what I said earlier.
Like, what was he doing then? Soldier First Class training, pop idol classes.
Yes, so.
Because there's no way I could be that, that excellent in dancing on my first try.
He just
That's not even possible. Yeah, it's like he knew offhand. It's like, oh hey, what's up? I'm like, I love that dancing segment. That was so much better than how they did. I mean, they just added. They didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? They didn't have to add that in the game, but it just made it set much more awesome. You
I
know?
mean, it was so over the top, but I just loved it.
Yeah. Like Wall Market overall, the chapter is like there's just this energy going, like you're in a party and you just want to keep going.
Yeah, no, I agree.
After you go for the Wall Market section, there's this part of the game where people don't really like, where it feels like padding. I.e. the train station.
I'm gonna try to be brief about it because obviously something just came up for
Mhm.
those watching. But my issue with the gameplay is during the segments where you are allowed to kind of do side quests. Um, I feel like it was tacked on. It didn't. It didn't really feel intertwined with the game. You
Like
know,
for
once
all,
you
like for every side quest, for most of the side quests.
most of it,
Mm.
I don't know. Because the game feels padded in a sense. If it wasn't for those side quests, the game would probably have been half the length it was with the side
But then
quests.
without the side quest, I wouldn't care as much for the people with Midgar as I have.
I don't mean essentially the characters that add to their story, like Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse. I mean the ones that are just pointless, monotonous side quests that you don't really need to do if you don't want to. I just think the padding for the side quests is what makes the game long, not so much the actual character side quests. Like, there's some good ones, but then there are some that are just fetch quests that aren't really necessary. I don't know. I'm mixed on the side quests. I'm not wasn't pleased with them. They were just like they were meh to me.
I think
They
it was
didn't
more
really.
so the act of doing them as opposed to like interacting with the NPCs and learning about like all the citizens of Midgar was great, but it's like, oh, kill 5 rats and come back. Like just like little
I didn't
things or
care
they
for that kind
feel
of
a little
stuff.
redundant. But
Yeah,
in terms of actual world building and lore, I think it does really well.
yeah. I didn't care for the little fetch quest, point A to B crap. I actually didn't feel like doing them. I did them in the beginning, and then as I got towards the end of the game, I was like, I just do the ones that are required and move on. Like the one where you're in the exercise equipment ones. Like you doing like the little Rocky. I call them Rocky trials.
It means the
I thought
squats.
those. Yeah, the squats and the one that Tifa does.
Wait, you don't like those?
No, I like. No, I just said I like them.
Oh,
I'm
you like
saying
them?
I don't mind that because it's like a mini game within itself. I don't like the ones where you go kill 5 rats and come back. Or oh, I got this piece of paper, a book. Can you go blah blah blah? I don't care. I feel like it was just padding to the game. It didn't really add anything else to it.
It added world building to me, so I never really minded it.
Not to go kill 5 rats.
To experience what these people, like the struggles they face every day. Then like
Then for me, Peter, I would be Cloud first class and be like, I don't give a shit. I ain't getting paid enough for this. That will be my world building.
like without the side quest areas. If I didn't do the side quests in Sector 7 slums, I probably wouldn't care about what happened to these people when Sector 7 plate falls.
Yeah, well, like I said, I just think it felt tacked on. I don't think it was done well. I think it literally felt. I think in a way it made the game feel longer than it needed to be, because it's linear. You walk down the alleyway, you got an open sector. Oh, here's a couple of side quests. You go down another little area that's like a tunnel. Then you got an open area. You know, after you do your set story, then it's, you know.
Let me ask you this then: if the remake was like just how they handled the slum was just exact the same way as the original, would you care about what happened to the people of Midgar? About the people with Sector 7 slums when it did fall?
I would say I would care more how they fleshed out Avalanche as a core group and the people that helped them, even if they didn't have all the extra side content. I think what they did was good enough. I mean, some of the side quests that pertains to the characters still could have been implemented in the game somehow, as it takes the story along. Like the part about when Jesse says, "Come by my house" or whatever. Like that's a little side quest in itself, technically, but not really because it's technically part of the story. But there are some stuff that could have been just added in side quests as you go along the story. What I'm saying is like it could have been done better. The side quests could have been added into the story as you're progressing it, not so much. Or here's a stopping point. Here's a bunch of side quests. Have a good day. They could have meshed them into the story as you went along. But I mean, it wouldn't change my perspective. I don't think, not too much. I guess I'm going to go ahead and say because the characters are fleshed out more. I don't know if it would have changed my perspective that much. Maybe a little bit. But I think, in a sense, I think the impact was more real this time because you got to experience the story. And I think even when you go back, remember? When you go back and you're seeing all those people trying to escape from the before the plate falls, that's impact enough. Even if I didn't need the side quest. The fact that they add that area where you're seeing all those people, you're doing your best to try to stop the plate from falling is good enough for me. Because
to me, the Sector 7 plate falling felt as big as it did just because I spent a pretty decent amount of time in the slums. So I actually cared what happened to them just because of the amount of time I spent just walking around and interacting with these people in the side quests.
Yeah, because like we mentioned before, like in the slums in the original, you're literally just like in and out. It's like just a quick stop.
Yeah, but I'm not regarding the area of just exploring Sector 7. I'm not regarding any of the areas as bad. I'm just talking about how this.
Yeah, but the side quests are interlinked with that, though.
I don't like how it felt tacked onto it. I'm not saying that they were not necessary. I just think they just added it in such a way that it doesn't feel like it was embedded in the game. It just felt like they had to add something in there to make the game feel longer. I feel like it's padding to a game that wasn't long enough to warrant just Midgard being done. Is what I'm saying. My issue is I've always felt, even when I was playing it, this feels tacked on. Doesn't feel like they was thinking this through when it was doing the game. It just felt like they just added it in to make the game longer. That's really my only issue with the game. As far as gameplay. That's how I personally feel about it. It could stem from the fact that 7 wasn't like that.
Yeah, because there's no side quest to do in the original Final Fantasy 7.
And I was okay with it. Push the story along. That's how 7 wasn't.
That's okay for interlude, but it's not okay if you're just doing an entire game.
But I'm just saying, you got to realize. Yeah, I'm just telling you how I feel. You didn't personally have to agree with me. I personally felt that it was tacked on.
Well, I didn't think. What do you think, that sword?
You don't have to agree with me. That's just how I feel.
I'm literally in the same boat as Peter, so like it basically just took all the work out of my mouth.
Dude, every episode, it's like you and Peter agree. It's like, whatever you think.
It's not every episode.
Not necessarily.
Right. Go and watch every episode. I don't think once I've ever been like, Forrest, you're right. Nope.
Well, it's not a matter of being wrong or right. It's just different.
I'm just saying that I just didn't. I don't personally think it was done well. I'm not saying that any of the side quests didn't matter. I just think the way it was executed wasn't done well.
We used to be and Sword disagree in Dragon Guard 3. I liked it.
It's
you didn't
true.
like it. So...
Okay, never mind. Okay, there's that one. I don't like Dragon Guard 3 either, so.
Yeah, I never felt that way for the side quests, really. And I played through the original Midgard session before it, so.
And just you get more invested in the world, the lore. Care about more the NPCs. You meet there's some colorful NPCs too.
And I like how you're rewarded for doing side quests in the form of how it affects the main story. Like Wall Market. Wall Market's whole shtick is rewarding you for how many side quests you did previously. Mm-hmm. With every dress being dependent on how many side quests you do. I think Cloud's dress too, in a certain way.
I think so, yeah.
And then Tifa's dress is just determined by what you say to her during the part where you and her have a personal moment. And the side quests too. So yeah, I like the side quests in this game, especially with how it rewards you with the different dresses you can get for Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa during the Wall Market section.
Yeah, like it just gives you good incentive to actually do them.
Like, if there's anything that felt like padding in this game, it's your second visit through to the sewer part of the game.
Yeah, that was admittedly kind of lame.
But though you did get that pretty funny Don Cornello moment. It's like, stop bullshitting. It's not bullshit if it's technically true.
There are like some certain story parts that might feel a little
Like
maybe like not filler per se, but like not totally relevant always. But I still feel like even the expanded story content that didn't necessarily progress the plot were still well done. Like I did like that newly added chapter with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, where you go to like Jesse's house, you see her dad is bedridden, she's gonna be an actress or something.
And I like how it foreshadows Malco poisoning that early in the game, because even the original didn't do that. And then
that was a very nice addition. It was a really good chat. They introduced that character Roche in that chapter. Like we never see him again after that, so I'm assuming that he's gonna come back in future installments. He's a really entertaining character. I did wish we see more of them.
You know, he was supposed to be in the final parts of the game.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, he was supposed to be in the original 7. That's another thing you got to realize, that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing for the first time may have already been thought of back then. It just wasn't technology-wise or space time constraints. Could have been a number of reasons why it may not have made it into the game. So we just don't know. And the Whisperers thing may have actually been something they thought about back then too. We just don't know. We won't probably ever know until maybe there's an interview asking or discussing it after the game's finished, where they may say whether or not this stuff was old or new. But yeah.
Speaking of Whispers, let's talk about Sephiroth.
Yeah, there's been some not controversy, but like division among fans of like some fans like how in the original where you actually don't see him in Midgar at all. And it's not until the first flashback with Cloud where you actually see him physically, so people kind of like that build up. On the other hand, and I could see both sides of the argument, to be honest. The other hand, in the remake, you actually see him and he actually feels like a constant threat, sort of. Like he actually does some, pretty despicable things here and there, so you're actually seeing it.
He feels more of a puppet master in this game.
Yeah, it's like he's pulling the strings along and forcing the characters to follow the path he wants them to follow. I think the approach of what Sephiroth is done in this game is done pretty well. I mean, granted, he really didn't show up this early in the game either in the original, so
I honestly could go either way. Like the original did it well, and I think the remake did it well. I don't think one's better or worse than the other.
I mean, I honestly, like I said, there's just some things that just make sense, and in order for the Whispers to make sense, Sephiroth needed to be in the game. I think it just all intertwines somehow.
So let's talk about the Whispers and what the story actually is. So there's gonna be some spoiler warning here. So yeah. So this game is technically a sequel and a remake, man.
Well, to be fair, after Crisis Core came out, it's pretty apparent that 7 is a prequel or not a sequel and a.
This is like the whole thing about Sephiroth is that, and the Whispers is that the Whispers are these arbiters of fate, and they basically here when the story isn't going the way as it should be, like in the original. So you see this like pretty frequently when Cloud first meet Reno. You fight Reno right there in the church. That never happened in the original. And then when Cloud wins, he's about to finish off Reno. The Whispers intervenes like, yo, you're not supposed to do this, man. Yoink, yoink you out of here. And then it's like, and then you see that Sephiroth might actually be the avid children Sephiroth coming to this timeline and trying to change fate so he doesn't lose.
But again, this is just speculation at that point. We don't know yet.
Yeah, but like Final Fantasy VII Remake is both a remake and sort of a sequel to the original Final Fantasy VII.
It really works as it's like more like a companion piece to the original almost.
I'm gonna stick I'm gonna keep my reserve on that till the game's finished, because we really don't know. What we do know for sure is if you've played and beaten Part 1 of FF7 Remake, is that a certain character from Crisis Core appears at the
Like,
very end of a scene from the end of the PSP game. So that really brings up more questions and answers about everything.
let me ask you guys this: do you think this game is for people who haven't played Final Fantasy VII before?
No,
That's kind of hard to say.
I'm gonna say no, personally.
I'm gonna say if anyone wants to dive into Final Fantasy VII the first time, who's never touched it at all, play the original first and remake. I think the remake, like I said, is better as a companion piece. Not saying it definitely can stand alone. Not saying it can't, but I really feel like your experience would
Like,
be
I feel
much
like
better if
for
If
90,
you don't care personally
for
about the original story, you don't want to play the old game because it's old, and you just want to play this new game just to have a fresh mind without a secondary opinion, I think it's fine. I think I think the game is designed in such a way that it throws in surprises to the veteran that's played 7.
yeah,
Because you're
You know-
thinking you know the game from start to finish because you've played it. You know, you play Crisis Core, so you understand Crisis Core. But then you play this game, you're like, wait a minute, this is not.
Yeah.
This is not. That's why for me, I can't really say a whole lot about how I feel about the ending without playing the rest of the game.
oh
To be
man,
honest with you,
that ending, man.
I think it was nuts.
Like,
Insanity.
I
versus Kingdom Hearts.
I didn't think they were going to get us to play. They got us to basically play the final Sephiroth fight in Avid Children in this game, man.
Yeah, basically.
But see, here's the thing about this, because unfortunately for me, I may have to leave like right now. So I'm gonna
Okay.
try to say what I need to say since we're at the end of the call, and I'm sorry about this for everybody watching. But I'm gonna leave my part here because I do have to leave, unfortunately.
Okay.
I had something come up earlier. But I'm gonna say my ending piece and then I have to go. What I was gonna say is the ending for me was just like a realm of a bunch of things. It's seeing the end of the game where should be the end of the game and fighting them at the end of the game, which should be at the end of the game. You know what I mean? It didn't feel like I was playing the beginning of the game at all. I felt like we just jumped through this dimension to the future. I literally felt like when they went through, ended up on the other side, I felt like they went to the future. You know
But-
what I mean? Like they went in like this weird dimensional area that they weren't supposed to be.
But
Like
basically, I think we basically went into the singularity where, like,
Like where the whispers reside, basically.
Yeah.
this kind of gave me some Final Fantasy X vibes for some reason. But
I get Mad Kingdom Hearts vibes.
well, no, the big monster you fight with the statue thing, yeah, that was
Oh,
Kingdom Hearts, like yeah, like. But I mean, the whole, well, I'm getting the Final Fantasy vibe is just the whole whisper and like just the weird ambiance of everything, just like the world, because you know, it's the core of the planet that's dying, right? And remember, you know, all the spirits in 10, they went back to the far plane. It just, I feel like it's a spiritual thing going on with the story.
for me, I don't think the whispers all that out of place in the original Final Fantasy VII, just because.
No, it's not.
Just
I don't
because
think
you got
so.
you got weapon, which is like the physical manifestation of the planet protecting itself. So,
Yeah.
and the whispers are basically the planet's will to keep it on
But
the
if
current
you
timeline.
actually remember at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you remember that whole ghost thing that happened? Remember the spirits or whatever from the planet come out?
On the original Final Fantasy VII,
Yeah, at the
Yeah.
very end. You don't think them could have been the Whisperers themselves?
Man, maybe.
It could
I'm
have
not
been.
Sure.
It could have been. They didn't say that in the game, but it could have been. I'm just saying. That's why I'm saying I'm leaving my judgment till till we beat the game, because I remember after playing, I said, wait a minute, didn't he have those enemies come out of the ground, like out of the core of the
wait.
planet to stop Meteor at the end of the game?
Know how people are saying that the original Final Fantasy VII might be a bad ending?
Could be.
And then, like the
Maybe-
and then the
maybe-
remake, and then the remake might be getting like the true or good end.
Could be, because remember at the end of the planet did get sort of destroyed, but the spirits from the planet came out and stopped the meteor before it completely destroyed the planet. But essentially everybody did die. It didn't destroy the planet completely, but it destroyed it in a sense that no one really survived. But like, Maybe those were the whispers at the end of 7. That that stream, that live stream that came out of the planet to stop Meteor. Remember that?
Yeah.
Maybe that is the whispers. Maybe the ending of 7, when those things came out to stop the meteor, could be where the story diverges. You know what I mean? Like maybe that was a point where the whispers was like, wait a minute, we got to stop this entirely, and maybe they decided to go back to before all this happened to try to correct it. Like if you look at the end of 7 and you see that happen, and you're thinking, wait a minute, whispers and that. I wonder. That's why I kind of felt like when I saw the ending of 7 and that happened, I think there's a connection. I think the very end of 7 is a connection to when you see the fight with Sephiroth and you see the ending of 7 with the meteor. If you think about it, I think they're connected somehow. That's what I think. I really do think so. It's like the first time you see like this weird spiritual energy trying to stop a summon. Think about it. If they didn't stop, the meteor would have destroyed the whole planet completely, right? But they didn't. They didn't allow it to happen. They said, no, we're not going to let you destroy the planet completely. No. And that didn't happen. So what they're doing in the 7 remake is they're trying to stop everything from being destroyed, right? Like people from dying, changing the story's outcome. I feel like ending of 7 is connected somehow to this game. That's what I think. But I didn't realize this till sometime after I beat the 7 remake. I looked up at the ending of 7 and I was like, wait a minute. That makes sense. But that's what I think. That's what I think. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And say I'm looking forward to the rest of the game.
That's all the time you have, right, Force?
Yeah, unfortunately I do. But I want to say, though, thanks for my portion, guys. Overall, my ending thought of the game, I liked it a lot. Looking forward to the sequel. But that's just what my ending thoughts are on the game.
Okay.
That's what I think of it. So, but unfortunately, I do have to go.
No.
Didn't want to leave, but some things happened that I have to leave right now.
Okay. I guess we should just continue then.
Yeah.
So that's Sephiroth fight, man.
That was nutty.
Yeah, like they made the Avid Children part of the movie to be playable. And you know what the best part is? You got your party members to help you. Unlike in Avid Children, where it's like, oh,
It's
Cloud
true,
can do
yeah, it
this.
was just a
Cloud
duel-
can
it
do
was
this
just a
by
duel in it.
himself. Cloud can do this by himself, man.
It's just dumb.
But yeah, it's really cool, especially with how it sort of does like Tales of Xillia thing, where the party is separated, but then they come in.
Yeah, and they join you one by one.
Yeah. But you only get a 3 party member. Like in the original Final Fantasy 7, the remake got like a 3 party system too. But it's really cool. And I'm not sure what determines who goes in this battle. I'm not really sure the requirements to it. I think it might be like a bond system, because there's like something like that in this game too. Or like there's a part of the game where you're gonna have this intimate one-on-one moment with a specific character who you have the highest affinity with, and that could be Tifa, that could be Aerith, that could be Barrett. I think depending on your affinity determines what characters are you gonna have in the final battle. Because for me, I had Aerith and Tifa, but then I seen other people play the game at that part, and they have like Barrett in their party. So
yeah, there's probably that affinity system that dictates who joins you.
Who did you had in the final battle then?
I think it was Tifa and Aerith. I think it's been a few months since I played it, but I think that's who it was. What about you?
Aerith joined first, and then Tifa. Because
Okay.
I remember Aerith saying, I remember when Aerith joins, like he's tough, and then Aerith's like, so what? Screw him. He's like, oh. And that only happens, I think, when she first joins. But yeah, I think it's really cool how they get the characters to join the fray, as it were. But yeah, that entire battle was just crazy. And then at the end of it, where it's basically a recreation of the final fight scene in the original Final Fantasy VII between Cloud and Sephiroth when you use Omni Slash.
Right, yeah. That's basically what it feels like.
Especially the camera angles. where the flashing camera angles. That's like basically OG Final Fantasy 7.
Yeah, it's basically literally just playable.
Yeah.
Like not
It
it was a great fight too.
Yeah. I really like the cinematography between the final confrontation between Cloud and Sephiroth. Especially with Sephiroth, like you can tell that he's not trying his best in this part.
Yeah, he's holding back.
Yeah, especially with how he there's a part in the fight scene where he has his sword on his back and just countering Cloud like that. The final battle was just nuts and just so cool, man. To me, I think they did the story this way just to say that we might surprise veterans who play through the game. We don't know what's going to happen now, just because when the final part of the game came, it just signified that the story can go anywhere now.
When they destroyed all the whispers.
Yeah. But do you think they're going to get Aerith to live in the remake then?
Ooh, that's a doozy. That's a tough one. I mean, I feel like a lot of people would be outraged if they didn't kill her, because that's such an iconic moment in the original Final Fantasy VII, and I think that just copping out and letting her and saving her in some way, or maybe she does die and they bring her back or some dumb shit like that. I feel like many fans would be upset because
I think she's still gonna die. I think.
Yeah.
You know who's the person who came up with the idea to kill Aerith in the first place in the original Final Fantasy VII?
It was Sakaguchi, right?
No, Nomura.
Was it him?
Yeah, he brought up the idea and then they came with it.
Okay, and I mean, considering the fact that he's one of the directors of this game, so he might continue that route in one of the sequels. Apparently,
there was an idea where, you know how at the end of the Final Fantasy VII, where you split your party and then you just bring 2 other party members and the rest deal with the Sephiroth clones. Apparently, the person who get left behind during that part would have died.
Really?
But then they changed it.
That would have been really cool if they went through with it.
I think Nomura was against the idea because he said that would have cheapened Aerith's death. Somebody said.
Yeah, I guess it would lose the impact instead of losing one party member, just lose them one by one. So it's kind of okay, who's gonna die next?
Yeah. To me, I think the story was a good retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII Midgard story for 90% of the game. And I think it did it really well with expanded story.
Yeah, it was a generally faithful retelling.
Yeah. And they really do a lot of good foreshadowing, especially for Cloud. I think they foreshadowed really well, how Cloud has this mental block. He's not who he say he is. And then you see moments where they mention a certain character, he just blacks out, and then you can tell there's something wrong with him. I think they did that pretty well. I think.
Yeah, they executed that foreshadowing pretty well.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about the plate falling, did we? In detail.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Because in that part, all 3 Avalanche members were supposed to die.
Yeah, but then only one. So we don't even know if one Avalanche member dies. Because Wedge survives the plate falling, but then it's sort of alluded that he might have died during.
Because in the Shinra building, the Whispers push him out of the Shinra building, and they
so he
so
might have died.
we don't know for sure.
Yeah,
but
then Big survived because we see him. Though I'm not sure if that's in our timeline or a different timeline, because there's multiple timelines now. Because we see Zack surviving alive and well in the part where he's supposed to be dead in the ending. We know that's a different timeline just because the insignia of that mascot is different from the timeline we're in. So I'm not even sure if Biggs is alive in our timeline now, just because there's multiple timelines now. So it's just crazy, man.
And I don't think they totally confirmed Jessie either. Did she die?
I'm not sure. Some people say she might. Some people say she might not, just because there's her gloves on the table where
Oh yeah, right.
Biggs is.
Yeah, she's kind of unconfirmed, I guess.
But yeah, in terms of talking about the story, I think like for 90% of it, it does a really good job of recreating and expanding on the original Final Fantasy VII. It does it in a good way too. The character banter is especially good in this game.
Yeah. It's like the battle banter too with the characters during the certain parts.
Anything else you think we should add?
I don't.
Oh wait. There's one more section. There's one more part that makes me think that this isn't for new players.
What's that?
You know when the plate's falling? You know who appears? Kate Sith.
Who?
Kate Sith.
Oh yeah. That would be really confusing for new players.
It's like, oh, who's this?
But I guess on the other hand, for new players, they'd be like that'd be something for them to look forward to for the sequels. They'd be like, okay, that's weird and what that's about, and then.
I forgot about Kate Sith when we were talking about original Final Fantasy VII.
Oh god, his implementation was terrible. Hey, let me join you. Okay, and then no other character like even acknowledges his existence.
Hey, let me join you because I raised this back fortunately. I'm totally not a spy, man.
And they're like, okay, totally not suspicious giant Moogle with a cat riding on top of it.
Totally not a man controlling a giant cat controlling a giant Moogle. But yeah, going back to the plate falling, I think I felt a lot more impact this time around than the original Final Fantasy VII. Especially
because it also has to do with the fact that with the world building in the slums.
I especially think like Barrett's outburst was a lot intense to me and powerful. Like you just feel all the emotions that's going through Barrett as he's just like cursing at Shinra about how they could have done this to the slums. But yeah,
because he did have that outburst in the original, but it just didn't have quite the same impact.
Yeah, at least to me. I just think there's a lot more time to let things sink in, I think, in this time around. I'm not saying that how the original Final Fantasy VII was handled wrong. It was handled really well, just because that was an interlude to things to come. At least that's how I thought of the original Midgar section.
Yeah, so it was a prologue, basically.
Yeah. But in terms of being a game just based on Midgar, I think how the story handles its story elements was done really well. You're given a lot more time to let things sink in, to see how these people would react, to see how Midgar feels like this real world.
Because you're in Midgar for so long in the remake that point it almost feels like home. Yeah. It really does. Like it just feels like you're in a living, breathing city.
I guess that's all about the story, really. Let's talk about the combat and other stuff then. Combat. I think it's a pretty good combat system, all things considered. It's a mix it's mostly real time, though there's an ATB part where basically like building up your ATB bar to do special abilities and that stuff like that. And I think it's a pretty good system. I like how item use is handled in this game, just because there's the definite limit to how you can use items that makes you think on if you should use ATB to use items or not. And I think that balanced item use really well. Just because
that was a big problem in Final Fantasy 15, where items were just literally totally spammable with no consequence. So the fact that you have to use ATB bars in Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I think, is a big step up, because you can't just cheese the system. You gotta like think ahead.
But yeah, I think I overall like this combat system. I think the pace is pretty fast, and the building up the ATB bar is pretty good. It doesn't take too long, and it just feels satisfying to build up the ATB bar to do your very special abilities. And down the road, you can build up that ATB bar up pretty fast using the right material. And I think the thing that makes the combat system a lot of fun is just how unique each of the characters are. in this game. Like,
Yeah, they all have their own completely unique fighting styles.
Yeah. Like Cloud's he's like
your hard hitter. He's like brute force.
And then like compared to Tifa, he has more emphasis on counter attacking. With Tifa has a lot more dodges, especially when you compare their parry, which is that parry materia is more like a dodge materia really for Tifa, which makes her so much more fun to use once you have it. But yeah, each character feels like they have a utility to them. Like Cloud's the heavy hitter that has a basis on counterattacks. Barrett's the beefy tank who specializes in range attacks and enemies are flying. Aerith is your basically magic user. Her melee attack, her normal attack is actually worth something in this game now, just because it's based on magic now.
It's true. Although I still found her like my least favorite to actually physically play as, though.
It depends. I think she's she's definitely the one you want to use magic on the most.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. You want to buff her up, beef her up with all your magic materia.
Yeah, especially since she has a skill that allows her to do attack spells twice with one cast. And then you have Tifa. It's basically like a fighting game character, basically. And she's so much fun to play, man. Like, Tifa's probably my favorite character to use in this game.
I mained her for a very large portion of the game.
Yeah. Especially, like, she has all these crazy skills on her side. I especially like building up her, like, chi level. And then just, like...
Yeah, with the unbridled strength ability.
Yeah. Like, she has a lot of depth to her in terms of, like, keeping track of her chi level. How she has dodge materia. Have like actual dodge, how a lot of her skills combo to each other really well, unlike Cloud's where it's just like one hit wonder. Like Cloud's like a much more brutal attacker, while Tifa is more like a fighting character in terms of her being able to form combos much more easily. And man, Star Shower is so good, man.
Oh, that attack is nuts.
Yeah. I like this. How do you think of the stagger mechanic?
I thought it was really well done and well implemented. I think it gives you incentive because if you use the assess materia, it gives you an insight on how to exploit enemy weaknesses and stagger them. So when you actually go out of your way to do it, it makes it feel that much more satisfying when you exploit their weaknesses and then knock them down and stagger them and deal all kinds of damage.
I think the stagger mechanic gives use to all the different skills each character has. But then the stagger mechanic makes it that some attacks you want to save for stagger, and some attacks you want to build up stagger, which made them all feel useful and unique. And
yeah, it incentivizes like experimentation and strategy.
Yeah. You know what some people complain about the stagger mechanic? How it makes battles too long.
Not necessarily. I didn't really feel like that was an issue personally.
Like to me, if you're just attacking without any thought, it's gonna take too long.
Right, because you're not like taking advantage of all the mechanics, and you're just button matching and saying like, oh, why won't this thing go down? And it's like, well, no shit.
It gives depth to the combat basically, because if it didn't have a stagger mechanic with how the abilities are done, you just do abilities willy-nilly without any thought to it.
And that would just make the combat totally brainless.
Yeah. Materia. How do you think how materia is handled in this game then?
It was pretty much identical, to be honest. And I think like when I was talking about the original, how I didn't like how the characters were blank slates. This game basically fixes that, because not only do you have all the customization of the original with the materia, you also have characters that all play differently with their fighting styles. So basically, it's completely remedied my issue with the original.
Oh wait, how do you think of the weapon system then?
Although I really like the weapon upgrading system, I thought it was very cool. It makes every weapon feel useful.
Yeah, I like how each weapon feels useful throughout most of the game, and the only like they are still unique, and some abilities and stats makes them useful towards a playstyle. But I do like how most of the weapons you get are useful throughout all the game. Like the Busted Sword, you can use that from beginning to end game, and it still be good.
I went back to the Buster Store to the end of the game because I found I like the
It's
balance.
well rounded. Yeah, it's well rounded.
Yeah.
And there's even a weapon that changes Cloud's moveset with the bat.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah, and that was the joke weapon in the original Final Fantasy VII, right?
Was it? It might have been.
Yeah, I think so. And I like how, like, Final Fantasy VII has a weapon skill mechanic in it. That, like, each weapon has a specific skill tied to it, which makes discovering weapons to feel so unique. It feels like each weapon is a big thing to discover in this game, which I really like. And then you just use the weapon over and over again until you learn that skill, like in Tales of Vesperia. Or Final Fantasy IX in this regard, just because it's a Final Fantasy game. Is there anything else to add to the combat?
Not really. I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's got a lot of things going for it. I think it's not a terribly difficult game, but I think that has really great bosses.
I think it's at the right difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Like most games, I think most games normal is way too easy.
Yeah.
And I think this game's normal is just at that right difficulty.
Yeah. It's not like too terribly easy, but it's not like cheap or anything either. It's a good balance.
Leveling system wise, it's just a standard leveling system.
Oh, I guess this is more of a nitpicky thing, but I didn't know if I really liked how summons were handled because they only appear in boss fights. Like you have no control over when they show up. They just a bar pops up that'll say summon, and then you summon.
I think that makes summons feel much more substantial, just because they're used in boss fights.
But I just feel like they feel also a little underutilized because there might be times you're in a random encounter and then maybe you're a little stuck, and then but there's like a summon might kind of be like a get out of jail free card. So maybe if they put like some kind of limit on summoning in a normal battle, like it just I don't know, like I agree that it makes them feel more powerful and more like an event when they do pop up, but they still like feel a little under.
It does feel like you are summoning a deity to deal with this powerful enemy.
Like contextually, I can get it, but like from a gameplay standpoint, it just feels a little like I guess lacking.
I'd probably say I like how they handled getting summons than the original Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, that I do like.
Because in the original Final Fantasy VII, you just find
they're just like laying around.
You just find summon materials on the ground after you beat a boss fight or in the environment.
Yeah, like after you beat Genova on the ship, like oh by the way, here's Bahamut.
Oh no, that's different.
What? Oh, was it? Yeah.
That's different. Yeah.
But yeah, they're like, oh, here you go, and it's just on the floor, totally missable, and it's just laying on the ground. Like what the?
Like Bahamut and Neo Bahamut, they're just laying on the ground, really.
They're no different than regular materia in the sense in how you acquire them, really.
Yeah, but then in the remake, you meet this character who basically gives you a bunch of tasks and lets you go into like a VR simulation where you can fight the summons, and that's the way you get those materials, which is so cool, man. Just fight these summons, and then like they're really cool boss fights, I think. And then that makes getting summons feel so satisfying and so big. It makes me really look forward to fighting like Knights of the Round at probably the third game. Like I already know what Knights of the Round HD is probably gonna look like, just because Final Fantasy XIV had a raid that basically is based on Knights of the Round, i.e. Thordan. But yeah, I really like how they handled summons, just in terms of how you're getting them. But I do think how you use them is just whatever to me, I guess. Just because at first I thought you were actually going to be able to control them like in Final Fantasy X, like as their own character. But then you have to use your own ATB bar to use them, which I think is disappointing, kind of.
Yeah.
Another negative thing I can think of in this game is probably how they handled phase shifts in this game in terms of the boss fights. Just because, because once you get to a certain HP threshold, If you just get them into like in stagger, if you reach that HP threshold, they're out of stagger, but just because they're doing a phase shift.
It just totally undoes your stagger,
which is really disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
It probably doesn't annoy me as much as other people, just because I'm used to Final Fantasy 14 fights where they do have phase shifts, and then you have to time your cooldowns based on that phase shift. Because like if you use like I play ninja and you use trick attack during phase shift, you just wasted a trick attack, man. So I'm I'm in that mindset that I'm already used to it, but I can see how that would frustrate players in a single player game.
Yeah, I get that.
I guess another negative is like the train section. Let's talk about the train section. I think the train section was too big, man.
Wait, what was? Oh, the train graveyard. Oh, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that went on for way too long.
Like, I like the segment.
There was that little side plot.
I like the segment about Aerith. Because
as a child, that was good.
And how it put emphasis more on how she really does miss her mom. But then,
that was good. But like when you have the whole thing with like getting the spirits to cross over and like it's just it just kept going on and on. I didn't think it added anything.
I think the section before the warehouse could have been taken out. Like if you just reach the warehouse after the sewer part, I think that would have been good.
Yeah, because otherwise it feels
like wait,
does feel a little padded out.
Wait, the part after I think is a bit below the. I'm not sure how it feel because I like the boss fight in the warehouse with you having to switch between a physical attacker and a magic attacker. But then I don't like the section after it, so I'm not sure how it feels like a boss gauntlet just because you have to fight the chariot enemy. Though I don't think the chariot boss is that good of a boss fight to begin with, so maybe cutting him off would have been good.
Yeah, that was one of my like least favorite boss fights in the game.
Maybe just have the warehouse and like integrate the arrow scene into the warehouse itself. I think that would have been a good compromise.
Yeah, that would have felt more smoother.
But yeah, overall, I do feel like the train graveyard is one of the two areas in the game that felt pretty padded. The other being the second visit to the sewers. Do we have any more complaints?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Like, I guess the last question asked is, how many games do you think we're gonna get in the Final Fantasy VII Remake and all?
I can envision it being a trilogy, because I always thought that the second installment, the cliffhanger would end with Aerith dying.
Yeah.
That would be the ending, and then the rest of the game would be the final part in the trilogy. That's what I always imagined.
I probably think that too. Disc 1, the original Final Fantasy VII, is really big, man. It's so big.
Disc 1 is like 70% of Final Fantasy VII.
When people say that, complain about this game only being like 30% of Disc 1, I thought the original Final Fantasy VII is gonna be this really long game. Just because if Disc 1 is this large, how long is Disc 2 and 3?
Yeah.
But Disc 2 and 3 aren't that long at all.
Disc 3 is literally
the final dungeon and side quest.
Like you boot up Disc 3, there's a small cutscene, bam, final dungeon. That's it.
I thought this was like a fake out final dungeon, like in Tales of the Abyss.
Yeah.
Like in Tales of the Abyss, there's this like fake out dungeon kind of, where you think is the final dungeon, but is actually the final dungeon. Alderaan is the final dungeon, but you thought it was the final dungeon because you fight Vaughn at the end, and then he falls down.
And then it turns out you literally have another 20 hours of gameplay after that. Still,
I thought the Final Fantasy VII Disc 3 was going to do something like that, but it really is just the final dungeon.
So it's like I wouldn't even call it 3 discs, really. Like
Disc 2 and 3 are they're just like that, just because of the cutscenes. Yeah, I can totally see them doing it in 3 games, just on the amount of content that was in Disc 2 and 3. But then you get into the problem of how much expanded material is going to be in the games, I think.
That's the other question too.
So I I think there's 3 to 4 games really, maybe leading to 4 games.
It's funny. I always feel like I feel like the remake as a whole really isn't that much shorter than Final Fantasy VII its entirety.
Mm-hmm. I guess because you usually spend like Midgar is the city and town you spend the most time on really. Why in the other towns in the original Final Fantasy VII you spend like 10-15 minutes in there really.
Yeah, you're basically just in and out.
The only time you spend like extended amount of time in the town is probably Golden Saucer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for me. The second visit of Golden Saucer was pretty much a pain just because I have to find the keystone, but I didn't know where the keystone is, so I was looking everywhere. And I didn't know that Dio's office was around the battle arena. And I think that's it really to say about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Overall, I think we really enjoyed Final Fantasy VII Remake. It probably is one of the top games of the PS4 for me, personally.
Me too. Like, it really, really exceeded my expectations. Honestly, I never thought for a second it was going to be bad. I thought it was going to be very good, but I didn't think it was going to be. To me, it's a damn great game for the most part. And I don't know. I know that there's some fans were angry about it for certain aspects. Maybe of course the possible divergence. The whispers are very controversial, and a lot of people also didn't like the fact that it wasn't turn-based. But honestly, I really like it as a reimagining. I think it's a great game in its own right, and I'm excited to see what they're gonna do from here on out. And like I said, it just really was a lot better than I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah. Same. I will say though that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not really for people who just want to get into the Final Fantasy VII universe for the first time.
No, this is not the place to start.
Yeah. You're probably better off starting in the original Final Fantasy VII, even though that game has aged pretty badly, even though I do think it's a good game still. But yeah, Remake, really good. Looking forward to see how the sequels handle the story and characters and the gameplay. Oh wait, one more thing. In the sequels, please have more shortcuts. Have more shortcuts, man. Because just having 4 shortcuts is not enough, especially with Tifa.
No. Because Tifa's got such a wide variety of moves, and you feel a little too constricted with only 4 shortcuts.
Because when you get that to it, if you do the shortcuts, you can just play it like a normal action RPG, really. Which I think is pretty cool. Well, maybe not normal action RPG, just because you have to build up to use your skills. But you could just like the pace of an action RPG. I'd probably say Final Fantasy VII Remake has probably the best implementation and execution of ATB system within a real-time combat system.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's all for today's episode of Sirus Gaming Corner. It's a shame that Forrest couldn't be here for the entire podcast, but it's understandable given what happened. But yeah, so that's all for today's episode.
Take care, everyone.